Here's our presentation on cell phone reduction study replication.
So our study was based off of the 2019 study reducing adolescent cell phone usage using an interdependent group contingency by Jones, Alday, and Givens. This study aimed to reduce student cell phone usage during class because it has been shown that with an increase in cell phone use during class, students are less likely to be engaging in learning activities, as well as just less likely to perform well on exams. So, the cell phone use during class includes things such as texting and being on social media. The original study utilized an interdependent group contingency as the intervention to reduce cell phone usage during class. So, this means that all students participating in the study had to meet these predetermined requirements in order for all members of the group to receive the reinforcer. The original study also utilized a reversal design in order to evaluate the effects of the intervention on cell phone use. So during the intervention phases, the teacher would tell the students if the entire class did not use their cell phone during the designated period, then they would receive uninterrupted access to their phones for 10 minutes during what they called a free time in class. They also found that it was most effective when this free time was at the end of class. Overall, the study found the interdependent group contingency was an effective intervention for reducing the use of cell phones in class. Other previous research has also been done that shows support for the effectiveness of interdependent group contingencies. So, for example, this intervention was also utilized in a group of fourth grade students in order to improve their accuracy on homework, which would overall just increase their academic achievement. So, for that study, the results showed the interdependent group contingency was an effective method for increasing their accuracy on homework.
The purpose of the study was to examine the effectiveness of an interdependent group contingency intervention on non work related cell phone usage. The study aimed to decrease non work related cell phone usage by using a group contingency. As part of the group contingency, the time spent on non work related cell phone usage needed to fall below 50% of the average of the baseline phase in order to receive free time as part of the group contingency. An ABAB design was utilized in effort to measure the effectiveness of the interdependent group contingency.
Hi, today I'm going to talk about the methods that we used for the cell replication study. So, the first thing is that the non work related cell phone usage, which was coined as NRCP, usage data was collected every day between 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Since we are all working in our group, we thought that would be the best convenient time for us to collect data instead of collecting it for the entire day. Secondly, each participants kept a manual data of NRCP usage uh, and verified that with their cell phone screen activity feature. So that way they could also equally take the IOA data. So each individual took their own IOA data, inter observer agreement data, which was done by uh, putting the data in a manual form and then verifying it with their cell phone. Secondly, data was collected for each phase. 5 to 7 data points was collected, and the transition from baseline phase to the intervention phase was done after each participant gained 3 consecutive data points which were stable and it was trending towards acceleration. So the same process that was done for baseline 1 and baseline and intervention 1 was also repeated for baseline 2 and intervention 2. Um, the next thing was that text reminders were sent to each participant, text reminders were sent to each participant about group contingency to gain access to gain free access to cell phone usage every day during the intervention phase. So the criteria was set was that each participant should meet 50% of the average baseline non-work related usage data points for each day of the intervention. Only then the whole group can gain free access to cell phone usage. So that was the contingency, and that is what was sent as text reminders to the participants during each day during the intervention phase. The decision regarding the transition, the phase changes, and whether to determine whether each participant had met the group contingency criterion. That was done during the weekly meetings that we had. Meeting logs were kept for that. This was in short a summary of the methods that was used throughout the study. Hi, today I'm going to talk about the results of cell phone replication study. So this is the results for the data that I had collected. So if you notice first in the baseline phase, the last point, the last data point is way lower than the previous 3 data points. But since collecting further baseline one data would mean more data would kind of delay the intervention process, I decided to just use the previous 3 data points, the stability of the first 3 data points moving upwards as the basis for moving into the intervention phase. Now, based on the calculation of average baseline, 50% of average baseline data point, the criteria that I was supposed to meet was I would get only 18 minutes. I should be using only 18 minutes of intervention, 18 minutes of non-work related cell phone usage each day during the intervention phase. But if you notice on the graph in intervention 1, the first day itself, I have exceeded my more than 18 minutes. I have spent 21 minutes on the phone. Therefore, from my part, for the whole intervention 1, I have not met the criteria. Moving again to baseline 2, the last 3 data points are trending way up. So based on that, I moved to intervention phase 2. Intervention 2 phase, and in that the contingency for that was 30 minutes. I could have 30 minutes of non-work related cell phone for each day of the intervention phase. And based on the 3 data points that I have collected, I can say that I have met the group contingency to access free cell phone. So the intervention 2 phase data is still ongoing, but as of now, for the presentation, I have met the contingency. Thank you.
So these are my results from the study. My first baseline phase lasted 8 days, so I extended it in order to stabilize the data, and it does show an upward trend for the last few days of my first baseline. And then my intervention 1 phase lasted 5 days, and I did not meet the criteria because on my last day of intervention, it went slightly over 50% of baseline 1, so that does not meet the requirements. And then baseline 2 phase lasted 6 days, and I had one pretty big spike in the middle of baseline 2. And then as of right now, my intervention 2 results do meet the criteria, and they are on a downward trend.
Here are the results of my data. The first baseline was 0.24 and the range was 0.8 to 0.38. The data showed an overall upward trend, so extended data collection was not needed. The first intervention phase had a mean of 0.12 and a range of 0.5 to 0.21. The first intervention phase did not meet criteria for the group contingency. The second baseline phase was extended due to achieve stable data. The mean was 0.15 and the range was 0 to 0.28. The second intervention phase was not met as well to meet group contingency. The mean was 0.25 and the range was 0.7 to 0.52 for this data set.
Hi everyone, I'm Casey and I'll be discussing my results from our project. I've included both my table and my graph so you all can see the data that I've collected so far. And so on my graph, you'll see that I have put on the y-axis 0 to 2 hours just to reflect that 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. time frame that we used to take and record our data from the project. And then all of my sessions are on the bottom on the x-axis. And then you'll see my different phases, my 2 baselines and my 2 interventions on the graph separated by those phase change lines. And just to discuss the results themselves, the actual data, first you'll see my first baseline, it was extended due to unstable data. Most of our group did extend their first baseline. As we started out, most of us had unstable data, and so I continued to take baseline data until I could see at least a variable ascending trend. It wasn't very stable per se, but it did end up showing that ascending trend, and so it indicated that need for intervention. And then in my first intervention phase, my data was also variable for my first intervention. However, I did meet our criteria of making our NRCP usage 50% or less of our baseline data. And so I did meet our criteria. However, due to our group contingency, not all of our members met that criteria. And so unfortunately, I was not able to access reinforcement for that phase. And then so after that, we entered our second baseline phase. And you'll see that my second baseline was actually a lot more variable than my first baseline. And so I continued to take data there as well. I also extended that one past the 3 or 5 that I had planned to do. I ended up taking 6 data points just to see whether I could get either stable data or a variable ascending trend. And I did get a variable ascending trend. In those last 3 data points, you'll see they're ascending very rapidly. And so that indicated another need for intervention, which was when I decided to enter my second phase of intervention. And you'll see that my second phase of intervention was a lot more stable than my first phase of intervention. And it showed that gradual descending trend on the graph. So far, I have met the criteria of making my NRCP usage 50% less than my second baseline. And so we will be waiting to see if the rest of my group for the group contingency have also achieved that to see if we receive that reinforcement. And so I think throughout this project, my second intervention phase was definitely more stable due to it being the second one and being more familiar with the data collection and also with the time frame and what I was supposed to be doing for intervention there. So I think you can definitely see kind of the project doing its work and encouraging me to use my phone less during that time. It was a lot more stable for that second intervention. And so I am excited to see whether our group achieves our reinforcement this time.
Hello, I'm going to be discussing my graph that correlates with my data, showing my results of the cell phone replication study. So on baseline 1, I took the last 3 data points, and to move to intervention, I took the last 3 data points because the The three prior to that, there was a very big increase, which delayed the intervention process. So I took the last 3 data points and I decided to use them because of the stability of the last 3. They were around the same duration of time, and I had to work on creating a duration that is 50% lower than my original baseline from baseline 1, and I had to have under 39 minutes of usage, which I did not meet in intervention 1 because from the first point in intervention 1 I was already at about an hour of usage time for my cell phone, and the second point was high as well, so therefore I was unable to meet the criteria for the original intervention first intervention. So then I took the second baseline data and I took the last 3 points again to, work on having a more stable data collection for intervention phase 2. And I still had to be under 39 minutes of usage, which I was able to do for 4 data points, in which I have one more day to collect data on in order to receive 30 minutes of free cell phone usage, and I was able to meet that criteria.
Here are the results of my data collected for non-work related cell phone usage. On the left, you can see a table of the collected data, and on the right, you can see the data that's graphed of what was collected from the table. The graph is broken into phases, and the first phase that you can see is the baseline 1 data. Looking at the first phase of this AB-AB design, the first baseline phase, the baseline mean was 0.47 and the range was 0.16 to 1.25. This is a rather large range. An extended data collection phase was necessary to achieve more stability before beginning the first intervention phase. The first intervention phase had an average of 0.55 and a range of 0.35 to 0.83. The first intervention phase did not meet the criteria of remaining under 50% of baseline data. Therefore, as part of the group contingency, free cell phone usage time was not given nor earned. This is when the second baseline data collection began. The second baseline phase was also extended in an effort to achieve more stable data. The second baseline average was 0.41 and the range was 0.12 to 0.95. Which again is a rather large range for this set of data. This is when intervention 2 data was then collected. The second intervention phase did not meet the criteria of remaining below 50% of the baseline data that was collected in baseline 2. The average for this was 0.29, with the range being 0.2 to 0.38. From the data collected within this phase, you can see that there is an increasing trend, and neither set of data between the 2 intervention phases remained below 50% of the baseline data collected between the 2 baseline phases.
The conclusion of the results are the following. For most of the group members, extended baseline was needed in baseline phase 1 to achieve stable data. Then intervention phase started once the individual person had stable data. This means that some people went into intervention a few days earlier before others. Once everybody went into intervention, we met as a group and determined if the group contingency was met. The group contingency was not met for phase 1, so we were not able to receive unlimited access to the cell phone. We then went into baseline 2, and that was extended as well to achieve stable data points. Having the baseline 2 extended meant that we did not have as much time in the intervention 2 phase. With limited amount of data in the intervention 2 phase, we are having a skewed idea if everybody was able to meet the group contingency. The data so far shows that we were not able to meet group contingency, so we do not get unlimited access to the cell phone. The conclusions show that the group contingency was not a strong enough reinforcer to allow it to be met either times.
There were several limitations that we faced when replicating this study. The first and probably the largest limitation of our study that I'll discuss involved our IOA data collection. Due to the nature of our study and the fact that it was all online and that we did not have face-to-face involvement with each other, we didn't have access to each other's cellular devices or methods with which to take that IOA data for each other. And so we ended up having to take our own IOA data. And so instead of the IOA data being taken by a secondary observer, the initial data was taken and the IOA data were taken by the same person. And so everyone recorded their own data and their own IOA data. And because of this, while it was necessary for us to do this, it was a limitation due to the unorthodox method of us collecting the IOA data that way. And this caused it to be not as reliable as it could have been if we had had another person taking that IOA data for us. Another limitation that we faced was in regards to the apps that we used for our study. We defined apps in the beginning and our methods as being either work or school related or recreational related. And so one of the limitations that we faced was that there are apps that members of our group use that could be used for both, such as YouTube. Many of our members use YouTube at work for work-related use or for school-related use, while also using it for recreational purposes. And so this was a limitation of the study due to the fact that we did not have a way to differentiate the times people were using those either for recreational or for work or school-related uses. We did discuss as a group trying to find a sort of tracker or something that we could use to differentiate those times, but there wasn't anything that we could find to do so. And so the best method that we decided on was manual data collection. And so using timers and recording those times that we used, apps like YouTube for recreational purposes manually in an Excel sheet, and then including that in our data collection. And so while this was the method that we decided to use, it opened up a lot of room for human error. And so this definitely was a limitation of the study due to the fact that it created the possibility for a lot of errors because of the method that we had to use. And then a last limitation that I'll discuss is the group contingencies that we used because of the nature of this study and the fact that we are an online group in an online course. We had limited possibilities for reinforcement amongst our group members. Instead of doing something together or something like that, we kind of used the honor system. And so our reinforcement was if you achieve criteria, then you get free access to your phone for a day. And this used the honor system. And so we didn't really have a way, because we were also taking IOA data on ourselves. And so we did not have a way to make sure that everyone was recording accurately and reporting their data accurately. And so this is another limitation of the study, just because we didn't really have that checks and balances system to make sure that we were all doing what we were supposed to be doing. And so while the honor system has been good, and I do believe that everyone in our group has, done their best, the best of their ability to contribute to this study and to make it as good as possible, this was a limitation of the study that we wanted to recognize.